Hey guys, what is going on there? My name is Brooke, or the Undead DM, and I am back at it again with another video today. In this episode of Homebrew Review, we are going to be going over the next subclass for the Pugilist by Benjamin Huffman, known as the Hand of Dread. Now, if you haven't seen my previous video on the Pugilist class, for my general thoughts on the base class, I would suggest going to check that out before continuing with this one, and then afterwards, feel free to go check out the rest of the subclass review videos to determine if this is a class that you would want to spend money on the DM's Guild. Of course, you should always support the creator, but without further ado, let's get started. So, the Hand of Dread is kind of the not really half caster. I call them the not really half caster because they get abilities that are very similar to spells, and they get a cantrip or two, but they don't really have spells. That's in a later subclass. So let's get right into it. Your third level ability when you get this subclass is Black Magic. You learn the Eldritch Blast and Prestidigitation cantrips, and Constitution is your spellcasting ability for these. And you learn to speak, read, write, and everything in one of the following languages: Abyssal, Infernal, or Sylvan. And if your DM is cool with it, you can choose another language that's more appropriate. So you may not want to speak Sylvan, Abyssal, or Infernal. You maybe want to speak Giant, because that's where your black magic comes from. Whatever. It's a flavor feature. Prestidigitation is a fun roleplay cantrip, and it can be useful in a lot of situations. And Eldritch Blast is kind of like the baseline damage cantrip for warlocks, and it's what we base a lot of damage on, is the baseline warlock using Eldritch Blast. So already it's got like a slight boost in damage. It's not good, but it's not bad either. Also at level 3 you get Dread Hand, where as a bonus action you can turn into your Dread form. You get Dread Hands, obviously. When you transform, one of your limbs transmogrifies, and for 1 minute, when you roll a 1 on damage die for an unarmed strike, you can re-roll the die, and you must use the new roll even if it's a 1. The first time you miss with an unarmed strike, you can make an additional unarmed strike as part of the same action, and immediately after you take the attack action, you could spend 2 Moxie points to make 3 unarmed strikes as a bonus action. Once per short or long rest. So, we're going to go over the general thoughts of this ability first, and I'm going to go into more detail a little bit later. So, re-rolling doesn't offer much. Re-rolling generally only increases your DPR by 2 or 3 points. Because when you re-roll a 1, typically, like with Great Weapon Master, or not Great Weapon Master, but Great Weapon Fighting, where you can re-roll 1 or 2, but you keep the roll even if it's a 1 or 2, you take the average die roll of each number that you're going to be re-rolling, and you calculate the DPR the same. So basically, since a great weapon, let's say a D6. I know there's no great weapon that has a D6, but for instance, if a great weapon deals a D6 damage and you have great weapon fighting, if you re-roll 1s and 2s, the average of a D6 is 3.5, meaning you just take away 1 and 2, and you replace them with 3.5. So you take 3.5 plus 3.5 plus 3, 4, 5, and 6. Then you add those together, divide them by 6, and that's your average damage for your die. It's only going to increase about 2 points. It's not that much. The first time you miss with an unarmed strike, you can make an additional unarmed strike. This is fine. It does increase your DPR by like a little bit, but not by much. You just get an additional attack. There's not much here. And immediately after you take the attack action, you get to make 3 unarmed strikes as a bonus action, as opposed to your normal 2 with your old 1-2 if you spend an additional Moxie point. If this was an additional 4 unarmed strikes as a bonus action, because you're essentially spending double the points for only 1.5 times the benefit as opposed to 2 times the benefit, this just needs to be fixed a little bit. It just needs to be buffed a little bit more to make it comparable to the old one too, if you're going to just replace it like that. At level 6, deal with the devil. So, you gain 2 Eldritch Invocations from the Warlock class, and for every 2 levels you get in the Pugilist, you count as having 1 Warlock level. So at maximum you can be a level 10 Warlock. So your Constitution is your spellcasting ability, and as a result of one of these Eldritch Invocations, and any Eldritch Invocation gained this way references that your Charisma uses Strength instead. And when you gain a level, you can choose an invocation that you know and replace it with another one that you have the prerequisite for. I think this is fine, but I think the whole restriction of you being 2 levels of Pugilist for every 1 level of Warlock is strictly worse than just multi-classing into Warlock. Especially if your DM is okay with you changing your spellcasting modifier to fit your character. This just generally needs to be you pick 2 Eldritch Invocations, and then at certain levels you can just pick Eldritch Invocations from a different level. So at 6th level you could pick 2 Eldritch Invocations at the lowest possible level, then at like level 11 you could pick ones from the 5th level, level like 14 you could pick them from the 10th level, and then anything past 14th level you could just pick any invocation you want. I think that's fine. Maybe you should also gain more than just 2 Eldritch Invocations, but we'll see. Grotesque Growth. Now remember, in my previous videos, the 11th level feature has to grant them some kind of damage boost. Otherwise, they are falling behind significantly in damage compared to things like a fighter. So let's see what we can do here. When you use your Dread Hand feature, you can choose to grow. Okay, so for 1 minute, your size increases by 1 category, and while enlarged, you have advantage on strength checks and saving throws. You have a reach of 10 feet, and your melee weapon attacks deal a d4 extra damage, and you suffer 1 level of exhaustion once the minute ends. Now, this is very interesting, because if you read the wording, that means if you use Grotesque Growth and you have to use Dread Hand at the same time, you're expending a use of your Dread Hand feature, which is once per short or long rest, and you're giving yourself a level of exhaustion for an additional d4 damage and plus 5 feet. And you're getting benefits that the Barbarian already gets as a bonus action baseline. So the extra d4 is nice, but it needs to be more significant than that. Because you gotta remember, at this level, a person like a fighter using a 2-handed great axe with great weapon fighting is dealing an additional 5.5 damage on average with their weapon as compared to the 2.5 that they're dealing with this. Yes, it's per attack, but if the fighter gets 3 attacks as a base and then they can action surge to get 3 more for free, not even expending their bonus action, this one, the Pugilist Dread Hand, has to expend their action in order to attack twice and then use their bonus action to use their Dread Hand, and then spend 2 Moxie points on top of that to get 3 strikes, meaning in total they're losing out on an additional attack, and the d4 doesn't make up enough for that damage. So, I think it's a fine ability, but it just needs to be amped a bit. It needs to be amped up. It needs to do more than just a d4. Maybe a d6, d8. Maybe you add your Pugilist level to the damage at this point, to your first one. Just something. And finally, you got your Fountain of Viscera, which is your 17th level ability. So use your action, you expend 6 Moxie points, and you can attempt to basically kill a creature in 1 hit. And they have to make a dex save, and if they fail, they take 100 piercing damage, but if they succeed, they only take 50 piercing damage instead. And if it is reducing them to 0 hit points, then it immediately dies and you rip a hole through them. And each creature within 30 feet of you who can see must make a wisdom save or be frightened for a minute. And a creature who fails to save can make the wisdom saving throw again at each of their turns. And once you use it, you cannot do so again until you finish a long rest. So it's an insta-kill. But there are so many hoops you have to jump through in order to get to this insta-kill. So let's go over this one by one. They have to make a dexterity save, which a lot of creatures at this level are going to have at least a plus 16, 17 in, along with their con and strength. Because remember, 90 to 95% of the monsters in the game are melee focused. So if they have low dex, low con, and low strength, that would make martials a lot better. But they don't. They have really high stats in those. So you're already having them make a very, very common, very, very high save that still uses 8 plus proficiency plus modifier. And if they fail, they only take 100 piercing damage. Mind you, this isn't magical piercing damage. This isn't piercing damage that goes through resistances or immunities. This is just straight piercing damage. It's important that they specify magical here, because if a barbarian is raging and you use this against them, it's still gonna take half, because barbarian, that was a bad example. So barbarians will take half damage no matter what. So if a dragon specifically has a resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magic sources, this doesn't count as a magical source, rules as written. So this, by raw, can be reduced, meaning you have to essentially reduce this against any creature at this level by half. So instead of on a failure they take 100 and on a success they take 50, it's more like on a failure they take 50 and on a success they take 25. And if they have to reduce, you have to reduce them to 0 or less. This isn't if you reduce them to half or less, if you reduce them to a quarter HP or less, if you reduce them to an amount of HP less than your maximum HP, nothing like that. This is, you have to basically kill them. Which is fine, but for a 17th level ability that's supposed to basically cause an area of effect fear, which we stated in the Arena Royale video, that an area of effect fear needs to have more. This ability, it needs to do more than just dealing minimal damage and then having a chance to cause that fear. Because remember, just to get to that fear, you have to make a creature fail a dex save somehow. They have to be at low enough HP with resistance to die from at minimum 50 points of piercing damage. And then you have to make everyone within 30 feet make a save, make a wisdom save, or become frightened. And even then, a creature who fails can make the save at the end of each of its turns, not even on a damage. They can just do that. I'm pretty sure you could do that with normal Frighten anyway. But this is a 17th level ability. Once again, the same level that wizards are turning people into dragons. And you get this. So, what do I think of the subclass? It's not that good, all things considered. I think it needs to be buffed. I think black magic is fine as it is, and allowing you to use Constitution for your spellcasting ability is fine. Dreadhand, the only thing I'd pretty much buff this entire ability actually, because rerolling ones is not that impactful at all. Missing and getting an additional attack once per turn or once per action is not that good, and spending double the points to get 1.5 times the modifier, the benefit as the old one too, and it's only once per short or long rest, and it only lasts for a minute. There are a couple things you could do here. Buff the abilities, make it last longer, give you multiple uses of it, whatever. Deal with the devil. Once again, I think this just needs some rewording. Maybe just 2 Eldritch Invocations, you get 1 at other levels, and you can pick Eldritch Invocations from different levels based on what level you are, yada yada yada. It's just rewording this a bit. Grotesque Growth needs to get a buff in the damage department, and it needs to just not give you a level of exhaustion, because if we're going based off of the normal 5e rules, this is terrible. But once again, like I stated in the Pugilist video, if we're going off of the 1 D&D rules, this isn't as detrimental. And Fountain of Viscera just needs to do more. It needs to do either more damage, it needs to just be a hit, it needs to be a save. It doesn't need to be a save at that point. It just needs to be, when you hit a creature, you deal your normal damage plus 100, and then if you kill it, then you do all this. But even then, I think the whole restriction of if you reduce it to 0, with that, it needs to be reduced to maybe like if you reduce it to 25% of their maximum health. If they're reduced to 25% of the maximum health or lower, then they die. And I think that would be a very nice way to focus fire down a boss. And this way you can almost guarantee that this is going to go off, as opposed to waiting until you think it's low enough and then you attack, and then it turns out that because of resistance it just doesn't work. And you reduce it to like 15% health and you just wasted your ability. And the Frighten is just fine, I guess. Overall, not the best subclass. Definitely is so far the only one that actually gives you even a slight damage buff at levels 11, so it's not bad. Either way, thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys like the series, please leave a comment down below. Tell me what I can do to improve. Leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see y'all for the next subclass, which is going to be Piss and Vinegar. Latest.